Assemblymember Gipson has authored other bills on homelessness, gun control, affordable housing, foster care, and clean air, and is truly a force of action. Thank you for joining us, Assemblymember Gipson. It's an honor to have you join us tonight and host a collective, our collective, to resolve this community issue and the outcry in order to rebuild the health and safety of our communities. So thank you for joining us, Assemblymember Gipson.
Richard, thank you very much to Alejandra for interpreting, and I'll try to do my best to not get so excited. To Cindy, thank you very much, Victor, and to everyone who's listening and also watching. It's an honor to be part of this dialogue. Let me jump right on into 1196.
Please, absolutely. The first topic of conversation, of course, is to provide an update on 1196, its supporters, opponents, next steps.
Sure. And I hope and pray that everyone is remaining safe and healthy during this very difficult time that we find ourselves in, not only in California, but throughout our world. It's trying times. We pray that everyone remains safe and also healthy, making sure that we do everything that our health experts have instructed us to do. It's the only way we're going to flatten the curve. But I assure you that we will get through this, and we'll get through this together. And remember, we are our brothers and sisters keepers. So with that, I introduced AB 1196. 1196, it bans the carotid restraint. And the carotid restraint, for some of you who may not understand or know what that means, is when George Floyd, the officer who put his knee on George Floyd's neck, he was actually stopping the blood flow to the brain that leads to, one, unconsciousness, two, it leads to death. And so we all saw that fatal situation where George Floyd was murdered right in front of our own eyes. And then also the chokehold or the sleeper hold. That one also stops the oxygen from flowing to the brain. It causes you to be rendered unconscious, and then it will also lead to death when it's performed incorrectly. And so what 1196 will simply do, it will ban such practices in the state of California. I also want to say, because I'm a Watts boy, I grew up right here in Los Angeles in Watts. The city of Los Angeles Police Department banned the sleeper hold, the chokehold, if you will. They banned that practice some years ago when we had a racist police chief named Police Chief Daryl Gates. So that practice was already banned within the city of Los Angeles Police Department. But many other departments in the state of California still use the carotid restraint and also the chokehold as methods. And those methods, I will simply say, have been designed towards and for Black people and brown people. And this bill 1196 bans such practice. It will eliminate many departments throughout California has already took a policy not using it. Well, that policy is only good as that police chief is still there. Our governor has already banned this practice for being taught in the police academies. But again, that executive order is only good as long as Gavin Newsom is still the governor of the state of California. Mm. This bill will ban it completely. Makes no difference who becomes the next governor of California. Makes no difference who becomes a police chief in these various police departments and sheriff departments. 1196 will ban such practices. And I'm happy to say that it has been it has built a coalition, not only the Legislative Black Caucus, who is moved as part of this legislative package, but also the Latino Caucus, the Legislative Latino Caucus, the API Caucus, the LGBT Caucus in Sacramento, the Jewish Caucus, the Women's Caucus. All of our caucuses in Sacramento has jumped on board to being a supporter and an endorser of Assembly Bill 1196. Please be clear. This bill was birthed out of what I saw and many of you saw when it came down to George Floyd's life being drained right before our eyes in that city of Minneapolis. And so we want to make sure this doesn't happen ever again in California, even though that situation didn't happen in California. We want to make sure it doesn't. And so this bill is also being looked at by other states, and we're happy to be able to do that. It has received 2 weeks ago the support of the California Police Chiefs Association that has endorsed this bill. Javier Pacetta, our Attorney General, has also been working with me to strengthen the language, and also is so very supportive of this pieces of legislation. And so we're going to run with the wind under our wings and the wind behind our back to making sure this bill gets on the governor's desk. The next hurdle now is to present this bill when we return back to Sacramento in August to the Senate Public Safety hearing. At that time, I want to hopefully present 200,000 signatures of people in California that say we want to ban the use of the carotid restraints and the chokehold in California. We are collecting signatures right now to do just that. And so we welcome and invite people to check out my website for more information. And I look forward to taking any questions you may have. So thank you very much, Richard.
Absolutely. And I know that you have a link to the petition. And I'm going to ask Cindy to provide a link in the chat box so that everybody here joining us tonight can learn more. Clearly, you've done a lot of work. Clearly, there has been a lot of thoughtful engagement, right, in terms of galvanizing support and engaging the various caucuses and leadership in law enforcement. I really think that speaks volumes to your leadership, but also to the need, right? The need around not only reimagining law enforcement, but also just being responsive and listening to what it is that people want. And furthermore, the nuanced aspect about the policy, right? You were very clear about the differentiation between an executive order, right, and the impact and the necessity for a policy. So thank you for making that distinction for all of us. And furthermore, I think it justifies the need for us to take action and for us to support, right? So well, please, Cindy, thank you for putting that link. I can see it now in the chat box so that everybody here can have the option to take some action. In addition to enjoying ourselves and having fun, this is also an interactive and action-based conversation. So we always appreciate next steps and some results. In terms of next steps, do you have any other pieces of legislation that support reimagining law enforcement, defunding the police, and/or items related to people's budget?
Sure, great question. And I want to also, for those who are watching, their viewers, I don't want to mislead anyone. As I share with you, I grew up in Watts, and I was a police officer. I was the first African-American police officer in the history of the Maywood Police Department. I enjoyed being a police officer. I come from a long line of police officers and law enforcement because it's part of us, our family, who wants to serve and protect, and making sure that bad people are placed behind bars, and that our communities are safe. And so I do this with the understanding of being a police officer, and I had to really take a second thought in terms of what I was doing, but this is the right thing to do. Change is in the air. People are demanding change. Dr. Martin Luther King said this, Richard. He said that being silenced is a form of betrayal. I will not be found guilty of being silent on the things that matter. This matters to my family. This matters to your family. It matters to all of our families, especially in the Black and brown communities. And when we talk about other pieces of legislation, the Legislative Black Caucus has 13 pieces of legislation as part of our reforming or reimagining law enforcement in California. I have signed on to probably all of those pieces of legislation, everywhere between one, making sure that police officers who have been disciplined, who've been fired, not have an opportunity to go to another police department and get picked up and work. We don't need those bad apples in our communities, in our law enforcement. Those people need to be rid of. And I said it, we should not have those people. When I signed up to become a police officer, I wanted to make sure that I served and protect my community, because my community was most important. Even though I didn't grow up in Maywood, Maywood was just like Watts. We have caring mothers and fathers who care about our communities and our neighborhoods. And so I wanted to raise up and making sure that I protect our community. And so the Legislative Black Caucus has these 13 pieces of legislation, even including legislation to making sure that any law enforcement officer that uses these things are never being able to wear a badge and wear in a patrol car ever again. Defunding the police department, I want people to understand what that actually means. It does not mean dismantling the police department in its totality. What it means is taking funds out of a police department and placing those funds in other areas. Because remember, police officers sometimes has to go and become psychologists and social workers. They should be enforcing and making sure that laws and people are protected. So some cities are reimagining portions of their budget to go in and bring in social workers and psychologists to respond to certain calls, so that making sure that someone who is in fact dealing with autism is not mistaken for someone who's on drugs, that person understands what someone is going through, or someone who's committing or thinking about contemplating committing suicide. You have the expertise as a worker or a psychologist to address those particular needs. And so we're going to reimagine what law enforcement look like in California, and we're leading it, and we're doing it unapologetically. We're not saying sorry, because time is now. We smell changes in the atmosphere. We can smell it just like we can smell rain before it gets here. We believe change is coming, and change is coming right now.
And I love how the package of legislation that you just described is comprehensive. I love, and I have, for better or for worse, personal understanding of the pattern that exists among law enforcement as they sometimes share or pass on officers across different departments. I appreciate the systemic approach to addressing that issue. So thank you for doing that. Also, I really appreciate how you clarified defunding the police. There is a bit of a branding challenge, right, in that statement. It has to get unpacked often. But at the core of it, and I appreciate your clarification, is really a differentiation of tasks and responsibilities. And as we know, based on the data, the vast majority of calls can clearly and competently be handled by other folks besides the police, not to mention probably in a more cost-effective fashion, right? So that being said, it seems like you're kind of opening the doors to some community-based solutions and providers. And so that really perfectly sets up the next question, which is the United Latinx Fund and the Latino Coalition of Los Angeles, as both a 501c3 and a 501c4, have had the blessing to cultivate a vast network of nonprofits and community stakeholders throughout the city of Los Angeles and the county of Los Angeles. So when you say reimagining community safety and defunding the police, can you please share with us the important role of nonprofits in helping you to advance that very ambitious agenda that clearly no one agency or department could do by themselves?
Sure. It's when I was a police officer, Richard, my chief of police demanded, he's old school, but he demanded us do community-based policing. When we got out of the car, where we knew who the Rodriguez family was, the Hernandez, the Garcias. And so the role that nonprofits will play and has to play when you talk about reimagining, we talk about reimagining our community, rewriting a new narrative, making sure that one, nonprofit have funding. And I want to say it again, have the necessary funding to do some of the work in our community to help reimagine what our community looks like. Reimagining that kids can play in the front yard and not be fearful of gangs and bullets and drugs and things. That reimagining that that our nonprofits can open up centers, so after schools that our young people can go to and get the kind of guidance that I once had. To be quite frank, when I was growing up in Watts community, we always had somewhere to go. There was always activity. There was always nonprofits, organizations helping mold us. Because you know what, Richard? It took an entire village to raise Mike Gipson. And I stand on the shoulders of all of those who whooped my behind. And I'm not suggesting that we do that in these days and times, but I'm saying that they poured into me even though I was not their child. And it took those nonprofit organizations to help shape our community. And we have to make sure that we have funds and resources for those community-based organizations to do the kind of necessary work that we need to do in our communities, in our cities and our counties to make them better. And so I am on the select committee for nonprofits here in the state assembly. And I'm going to be able to, one, raise that conversation level for next year in 2021, when we look at and move forward towards funding a new budget for 2021. And so I look forward to doing that kind of work moving forward. But our nonprofits are our backbone of our community, and I recognize that, and my colleagues do too, and we want to make sure they stay in the forefront, especially when it comes down to resources, because they absolutely need it.
And I can share with you firsthand through the conversations that we've had with our nonprofit grantees and networks is that similar to the private sector, you know, they've been able to predict that come, you know, the final quarter of this year, starting in September, that's really when the financial uncertainty is going to hit. And so we at United Latinx Fund decided to move up our grant cycle by 3 months so that we can actually make those investments starting in September when our nonprofits need it most. So, you know, LCLA and United Latinx Fund, we are offering our expertise and our partnership in any way so that we can achieve our common goal, which is to fortify the nonprofit infrastructure that clearly you and I both benefited from, but also needs to be in place in order for these ambitious proposals to be impactful and to be sustainable, which is, I think, something that we all want to see happen. Also, I do want to remind folks to please, if you have questions for Assemblymember Gipson, please do put them in the chat box. We are approaching the question and answer session. He's shared with us some really exciting policies that cover a variety of interventions around community policing and practices. I think that many folks would consider long overdue. So let's now open up to question and answer, and I'd like to pass the mic over to Cindy. Welcome, Cindy, and if you could facilitate the Q&A.
Hi, thank you, Richard. That was great. Thank you, Assemblymember Gipson, for just taking the time to be with us today. It's really important for us to really just hear our perspectives and be able to have that integrated background. So the question that I have for you is from Dora, and I'll give Dora a couple of seconds afterwards to provide any follow-up comments. The question is regarding the chokehold policy. So what will be the consequences if officers use the hold regardless of the law, as it has happened in other states?
Prosecution.
That was an easy answer. Dora, I'm about to unmute you. So if you have any follow-up comments, just give me 1 second. I'm about to find you.
It's the same thing that the officers right now are going through who killed George Floyd. Charges, civil rights charges, all those charges can be leveled against a police officer, and also hold a person liable for one, breaking the law, because when we put this in practice, it will be against the law to use those methods. And, you know, the president did an executive order saying that you can he's going to ban it, but only if you feel your life is in jeopardy, you can use it. That doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't make sense to me. And so we want a complete ban. I want people to be clear. We want a complete ban on utilizing these methods and practices in the state of California. And we believe this is the right way to go. And we believe that as others have jumped on board to support this piece of legislation, they believe it also.
Yes, so please do take the time to sign the petition. I provided the link on the chat box, but Dora, you are now unmuted. Any follow-up commentary?
No, I just wanted to make sure that was included because I've seen it happening in other states regardless of the law. And I'm really glad that they're pushing forward to get attention to this that's killing our citizens. So thank you for getting that out there.
Thank you, Dora, for your question.
Well, just to sort of be the devil's advocate, because this is something that is playing out right now. So we have law, right? And then we have the district attorney, right? Who has an ability to weigh in terms of which cases actually go to trial or are settled, or the way in which they are tried, right? We have a very lively race that is occurring right now for district attorney. And so if you feel comfortable chiming in terms of, how do you see or what can be done? Let's put it that way. What can be done to try to ensure that when the law is broken, the district attorney responds in a way based on the evidence that would merit going to trial,
Right, and my esteemed colleague who hails from Sacramento, Kevin McCarthy, a member of the Legislative Black Caucus, is also carrying a piece of legislation right now that was simply say that officer-involved shooting that results in a person losing their life, that case is advanced automatically to the Attorney General for their investigation and or prosecution. And so we believe that this will also fall into that same category if an officer's act, in fact, used the use of force and it result in someone's life being lost. And Kevin McCarthy's bill is Assembly Bill 1506, and that's called the Independent Investigations for Police Deadly Force. And so this will be in that character, in that same vein. In addition to that, we made with the Attorney General Javier Pocetta's team working with this bill, as well as the consumer attorneys, as well as Cora and other legal minds, the Langston Hughes Bar Association, their members. If this method is being used where any oxygen or blood flow is being restricted, it falls under that category of 1196 and can be prosecuted. And so we're very intentional when it comes down to this piece of legislation to making sure that, again, that this is not performed anywhere in the state of California. So it's Kevin McCarthy's bill, is Assembly Bill 1506, that advanced police officer use of force to the Attorney General's office.
That is quick question. Does any other state have a similar law which kind of removes or depoliticizes these cases and puts them at the state level at the AG, or would California be the first to do that for these types of incidences?
Yeah, it's my understanding there are other states that actually do this, and I can't recall them right off the top of my head, but we'll not be the first one to do. I think we are and will be the first to carry such a hefty piece of legislation or package like this, because some states are carrying, bits and pieces, but we're carrying almost like 15 pieces of legislation. Now, that's not to suggest, and I want to be clear, that every piece of legislation will be signed by Governor Newsom. And so we realize that we have work to do after he does his signatures at the end of September. or the beginning of October, because everything has been, the dates have been changed. There's going to be more work for us to do in the new session around police officer reform. And there's a lot of my colleagues eager to get ready to do that kind of heavy lifting.